Chapter 6. As my readers will no doubt have surmised by this point, while the warriors of Heathmoor were biding their time and chasing their own tails, as it were, the orcs were making strides towards their end goal. Already small bands of Gretchens, Squigs, and orcs were striking at farmsteads, villages, and the occasional nomadic tribe. It would be these strikes that finally gained the attention of the noble legion and their Lord Warden. This is the account of their first encounter with the Greenskins. However, it is oddly enough from the perspective of the Valkyrie Aela. For whatever reason, I could find no written records from William or his lieutenant of their first encounter with the orcs, and if I were to hazard a guess, I believe that, at the time, they were just too overwhelmed by the reality of what they just fought against, and might not have been willing to log the event itself, lest they learn later it was all a mere delusion. If I'm being honest, I have felt similar emotions during my younger days, particularly after dealing with such foul Xenos as Necrons or Tyrannid Gene Stealers. But I digress. From the account of a Valkyrie, Aela. My father would say to me as a child, "Every moment in our life is an opportunity to learn." So here I sit in my chambers in the tower of the Noble Legion's castle, and I try to take in all I see. The floor is cold and stone, with a single carpet laid out for me. A bed is set, and I am impressed that it is not a mere cot, as I was expecting for prisoners. However, from the way William spoke, he is not treating me as a prisoner, but more as a guest. The Night Warden is a strange one. That much is not in doubt. When presented with the axe, I expected him to plunge the blade into my skull and be done with it. I was so certain I would meet my death here and there, and yet I was spared that, and more so, given a place to lay my head. It's been weeks since I arrived in Oxshire, and I have learned the Noble Legion's origins. I've seen firsthand the suffering of her people at the hands of my sister. The one called Roden often reminds me that my people are not forgiven, that retribution will come, and yet there are also odd moments of generosity from him. He offers me extra bread when I am hungry, and he brings me milk or even wine at times instead of water. Perhaps he's making up for when he bested me in combat. I dread should my sister find this journal and learn of what conspired between him and I on the second week of my stay. How many men have challenged me in hand-to-hand combat and met their defeat under my boot? I have lost count, I confess it. It was always to father's amusement to when strong raiders and gruff warlords drop their weapons and charge at me with the intent to overpower me, only to be brought to the ground pleading for amnesty. Roden had delivered my evening meal for me and inquired about the scar on my left arm from one such duel, and when I told him that it was from a warlord who had duelled me, I added, perhaps inappropriately, that I have never lost a match against a man. It was then that Roden's more hostile demeanor seemed to leave him as he quickly challenged me himself. He escorted me out to the training field and stripped himself of his armor and helmet, so he only stood in his tunic and trousers. He was, I confess, more ruggedly handsome than I'd expected. His hair shaved and his features chiseled. He had keen blue eyes and long, terrible gashes just along his left cheek, leading up to his ear, which was missing a small chunk of flesh.
"Don't mind the scar," he said. "Got that one as a young man, still learning how to block a Nodachi. You should really see what the Kensei who did this to me looks like now, if you can find his grave."
He had bravado, that much was clear, but I was still certain he would lose. They always do. He came at me with a rushing charge, which I was used to, so I sidestepped his attack, ready to trip him and send him to the ground. But to my surprise, he jumped back, sweeping kicks and grabbing my shoulder and arm, flipping me to the ground. I retaliated with a kick to his side, and he grunted and proceeded to let go, allowing me my chance to get up. Startling, but I was able to get back into the fight. I threw 2 strong punches, but he evaded, showing years of combat discipline. He then brought his knee up to my stomach. I blocked, but the force of his blow left my hands shaking, and I wasn't ready for him to throw his arm up against my chest as his back leg swept me off my feet. I hit the ground and he fell on me. We wrestled like 2 bear cubs over a fish, and I did all I could to regain the upper hand. Even without his armor, he endured my blows as if they were nothing more than kitten scratches. Finally, I managed to roll out from under him, clambered to my feet, and aim a well-placed kick at his chin. He took it and rolled with the blow. I pursued him, only for him to catch my ankle and twist, bringing me to the ground again. He jumped on me, putting a knee on my stomach and raising his fist as if to break my nose. But the blow never came. I stared at the man over me, who was smiling widely and panting as though he'd run for 5 miles.
"Yes, I'm your first," he laughed.
"What man are you?" I asked in response. "Your body must be made of stone." Roden got off me and removed his tunic, and it was there I saw the state of his features. Though toned, his body had many scars and scabs all over, as if he had been beaten and lashed by the whip like a slave.
"I spent quite a long time taking beatings from jailers and angry cellmates,"
he explained, and I could sense the cold humor in his voice. "Certainly not expected. Punishment for disobedience for knights in Ashveld can be extreme. Prisoners might be thrown into tight cells with each other, with only ankle shackles to hold them to the walls, and food was limited, so brawls for food itself was not uncommon. From what I learned of him, Roden was one of the toughest fighters in the prison. Given that he was forced to only use his bare hands in combat, it makes sense that his fighting instincts were sharp." This was not a discussion he enjoyed engaging in, I could tell. I quickly dropped the matter and allowed him to return me to my room. But it was after that engagement that I felt the rift between myself and Roden had greatly decreased. For the next few days, we were not so hostile or angry. In fact, if I'm being honest, I began to quite enjoy his company. By the 3rd week, however, something was strange. Roden had not come to deliver my morning meal as he usually did, and I was beginning to wonder what became of him as the sun was rising higher and higher into the sky. After some time, it was not Roden who came to my room, but the night warden William himself. He was clad in his full plate mail armor, and his helmet was tucked under his arm. He glared at me with a look that told me he'd rather not have to put up with me at the moment. There was a look in his eyes that I'd seen on my father when he'd gotten bad news.
"You're to come with me immediately,"
he snapped immediately. "What's wrong? Where's Roden?"
"I've sent him ahead of us. We're going to meet him due east of here. A checkpoint village between Akshar and the Black Fortress was attacked last night. The ones who attacked it were described by a few of the survivors as goblins."
You can be sure that I was most excited at this news. I leapt to my feet and hurried to join him at the door. He led me quietly through his castle to the outskirts of the castle gate, where a small force of knights were waiting to leave the village. All were mounted on horseback, and there were 2 horses waiting on standby for, I assumed, William and myself. William wasted no time in climbing on, but I hesitated.
"Get on. We need to go quickly."
"I'm of no use to you without my spear and shield," I pointed out. William glared at me before putting on his helmet.
"I will not arm my potential enemy. Prove yourself my ally, and I may return what is yours," William answered.
"Then how am I to fight?" I demanded angrily.
"Fight?" one of the soldiers laughed. You are joining us to observe," William corrected forcefully. "You said to me that your own home had been attacked by something akin to hobgoblins, so I need to know if this is the same enemy that you referred to. If so, then perhaps we share a common enemy."
I wanted to argue more, but William indicated the horse.
"Roden assures me I can trust you. I respect Roden's judgment, so I will allow you to join us. Do not disgrace Roden's trust or mine."
His words struck me in a way I did not expect. I felt the urge to prove myself, for not only my own honor, but for Roden's as well. I climbed onto the horse and followed his company to the village in question, silent as I surveyed the region for any sign of the assailants. Editorial note. It's important at this point that I explain a few key details about Orcish warfare and psychology for those readers not as familiar with them, or what comes next will seem strange. Orcs are a race bent on only one form of communication and understanding: battle. Orcs might not be as intellectually gifted species as some others, and they are certainly simple-minded, often being only able to focus on a single idea at a time, but when it comes to battlefield intuitiveness, there's no equal. Orcs adapt quickly to situations on the field of war and will often adopt new means of combat from analyzing their enemies and their peers. That said, orcs become blood-hungry very quickly. Those who've been in firefights with the greenskins will no doubt agree that their accuracy is very poor. This is not due to lack of training or skill, but rather because orcs prefer to fight up close and personal. Orcs have a desire to personally kill their targets with melee weapons. It proves their strength, and it makes them feel superior. The desire to get up close to the enemy results in them firing poorly and with little regard for accuracy. However, when in close, orcs are shown to be nothing short of ferociously lethal, with muscles that could nearly cut through even Astartes' armor if large enough. And on top of this, orcs are a hearty race, able to shrug off injuries that we humans would find incapacitating. They're certainly killable, but they will never go down without a struggle. And for the warriors of Heathmoor, this new struggle will prove to be far more taxing than they might have realized. The town was burning. Steady clouds overhead warned us of rain, but we could see the glowing embers of destruction ahead. I watched the road anxiously, searching for Rodin or the goblins. I saw no one, but the occasional corpse of a peasant who had been fleeing the town. A few had spears and arrows in their back. The weapons were crude, barely held together and looking savage. Blood splattered the grass and cobblestones around us, and the horses jittered uncomfortably.
"Spread out and seek survivors. Do not lower your guard," William instructed.
He then turned towards me.
"You are to travel with me a little further."
He dismounted and urged me on as well. I didn't argue and walked with him. He was leading me down the pathway towards the burning village, hoping to get closer to the devastation.
"With any luck," he muttered, "we'll find a body or two of these goblins."
Much of what we saw is a blur to me. I remember stepping over the charred remains of houses, storefronts, and a church. I saw bloody bodies with horrified looks on their faces. I saw heads pulverized and skulls yanked from heads tossed around like rocks in a riverbank. It was enough to cause my gut to churn, and yet I couldn't look away. I was so caught up I didn't even notice Rodin hurrying towards us from the western portion of the village.
"Lord Warden," he called, "I found about 7 or 8 survivors outside the village. All said the same thing. Something like goblins. They're convinced a few are still around. Did you see any yourself?" "No, sir," Rodin answered. "But, sir, if I'm being honest, something isn't right here. I feel like there's something here that shouldn't be."
"Given the circumstances," William chuckled darkly, "I'd say you're right."
"Sorry, sir, that was a... Ah!"
I heard the blood-curdling scream and then a horrific roar that sent a shiver up my spine. All our heads yanked around towards where one of the swordsmen that had accompanied us had been. There was a sound of metal clashing with something very hard, and we ran in the direction of the fighting. And there was another roar. A mighty blood-curdling roar! And then at last we broke the clearing and we saw it. It stood almost 5 feet tall. It was a hulking beast with sickly green skin. It wore nothing over its barrel chest and large pectorals, and its arms held rippling muscles. It had a large underbite with a pair of mismatched tusks protruding up. In its meaty hands it held a crude war axe-like weapon, and he was using it to bash in the skull of the poor warrior who had been unfortunate enough to cross it. Its pointed ears twitched as its head turned round. With an ear-splitting cry it came at us. I had no weapon to fight it, so I was yanked back by Rodin, while Night Warden William pulled his longsword. The mighty beast brought his axe down, but William sidestepped and charged, slamming his shoulder into its side. The monster grunted but didn't fall over. He turned and swung his arm as William threw up his sword and slashed across its elbow. The beast howled in pain, but didn't even slow down, kicking William with its foot and sending him stumbling backwards. Rodin cried out the warden's name and ran to his aid, flinging his full weight into the behemoth. His shield struck it with a resounding gong, and the goblin fell at last, rolling out of the way and swinging his axe down on Rodin. I watched, awestruck, as Rodin took the blow with his shield and then swung his flail up into the monster's jaw in an uppercut that would have smashed bone. Before the monster could respond, William ran up behind it and impaled it through the back with his longsword.
"Die, demon!"
William roared. And for a single fleeting moment, I was sure the beast was done. But that moment was dashed in an instant when it roared again and swung William off.
"Blasted slashy boy! You got lucky with that!"
It bellowed in a broken form of Latin that I'd never heard before. It reminded me of when my sister tried to speak the language, only this sounded much more simple.
"Now I crush your humy skull in and pick you out of my teeth with your sword!"
He yanked William's own sword out of his body and threw it down at him. William rolled clear just as Rodin smashed it across the face with his flail. The demon screamed and swung at Rodin, who finally couldn't withstand the strike and was knocked over. William ducked the wild blow of the beast, and finally, with a swing of his unparalleled finesse, he took the monster's head off at the shoulders. The goblin stumbled, staggered a moment, and then fell dead, a pile of green sick and meat. William threw off his helmet, panting heavily, winded and out of breath from the battle. Roden was coughing and climbing to his feet, clutching his side.
"That was a goblin?" he gasped, coughing again. "Damn it all! It was tough as a Shugoki. Maybe more so. It's like a blasted battering ram." "Ask the villagers how many of these things attacked the village together," William explained. I listened to him talk as I walked towards one of the dead villagers and removed the crude spear from its back. I glanced at it and marveled. Though definitely roughly made and flimsy, it was still sturdy enough to be used, and if I was correct, I noted that the length and style of the spearhead was not unlike the kind I had or any other Valkyrie. Was it possible, therefore, that goblins could perhaps replicate our weapons? If so, when and how did they learn to do this?
Likely when they raided Valkhamhain in the first place. Orcs are quick to learn other means of combat if necessary, and as these orcs have no patriarchs to educate them in the typical orcish weapons and tactics, they are having to learn off the cuff while in Heathmoor. Thus why they are likely learning to borrow weapon ideas from their enemies. That said, it won't be long before they start developing their own twisted version of what orcs called Daka.
It was at this moment that I suddenly noticed a movement. I glanced up just in time to see a large burly beast come running madly from hiding. It had only 2 legs and a massive set of giant jaws that hung open, revealing razor-sharp teeth as long daggers. It screeched wildly, running at William with a ravenous hunger. William spun to see it, but was not ready to react. I had no time to think, no time to even second guess, so I ran forward with all my might and plunged the spear I was holding into the monster's side. It screamed and thrashed furiously, but I kept the spear buried in its flesh, shoving it to the ground and holding it as if it were a giant snake. Though it could be nothing less. It was almost as large as that goblin creature, but it had reddish skin and at least 6 eyes, all yellow and beady, with 3 on either side of its head. It roared and snorted several times, resisting my hold, before finally going limp, laying dead beneath my spear.
"What in the name of God?" Roden hissed. "It was like a demon of hell. Are the pits of hell opening for these things?"
"Thank you," William finally spoke, looking from me to the monster.
"I don't know what this thing is, but it likely is from the same group as that green one I killed. Probably trying to get revenge for its dead friend."
In actual fact, the creature was likely a squig. Squigs are the most basic form of orcish life, and they are primarily used as a food supply for the orcs, much like cattle would be used for the average farmer. They are animalistic in nature, and capable of communication or rational thought. It is likely that these orcs that attacked the village were a large raiding party, though brought along a few squigs to eat as snacks for the journey. One managed to separate himself from the pack and, out of hunger or just feral frenzy, thought that William would make a decent meal. I bowed quickly, hoping to show him as much respect as I could, though my eyes glanced towards Roden, who I hoped was smiling behind his helmet. William looked once more at the monster and then at Roden.
"Continue the search for more of these things, and leave none alive. Then report to me."
Roden gave a quick nod and then sprinted away into the town. I started to follow, but a hand from William on my shoulder stopped me.
"A moment."
"Sire?"
"You could have let that thing kill me, but you saved me, and I owe you for this."
"Again, it was my pleasure."
"No, it wasn't," William corrected. "Since you came here, I have been hostile and unforgiving towards you. I still don't forgive your sister for her deeds, but it's clear to me now that you are not guilty like she is. I pray that your father is as honorable as you are, because I will have need of him soon."
He turned to the dead swordsman and hefted the shield from its arm, holding it out to me to take.
"I'm sure it's not what you're used to, but take it. Use it alongside that spear until we've dispatched what's left of the mongrels here. Then we shall return to Ackshire. I shall return what is yours, and I will release you with a message for your father."
"A message?" I asked, trying to hide my excitement at getting my freedom back.
"Yes, it would seem that whether they be goblins or demons, a strange and terrible threat has come to our homes, and I suspect the samurai will meet them soon as well if they haven't already. If we're to learn the nature of this foe, then I suggest we pool our resources. I would like an audience with your father. I will determine a place and a time. We must be prepared for these monsters."
And on that note, we'll close out Aela's recount for the time being. The group would go on to slaughter a few straggling squigs in Gretchen, but no large orcs would be found again within the village. Unsurprisingly, though, as I doubt many would have stuck around from the raiding party, William would act quickly upon their return to Akshire to prepare Aela for her return to Hraffenfell, and, I must confess with no small degree of amusement, her recounting reveals that she was hesitant to leave if it meant she and the conqueror Rodin would not meet again. But it wasn't just to Hraffenfell that William sent messages. He would dispatch 2 more messengers that same day. One was a peacekeeper named Hope. Her message was the same as Aela's, but it was meant for an entirely different recipient.